Oh yes, Danville, Illinois, the hometown of Dick Van Dyke. What up, Dick? When identifying an armpit city of a state, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the worst city in that state.
Nope.
Although it could be close to number one on that list. An armpit city is usually a former industrial powerhouse that's seen its problems with economic decline. That usually leads to a downward spiral where all aspects of the quality of life for said city head down an unwanted path, uncontrollably so. That being said, Danville most certainly qualifies as being the right armpit of Illinois. The only other candidate really would be Decatur. Danville is about a 2.5-hour drive south of Chicago. It's actually closer to Indianapolis than it is to Chi-Town. Danville is the county seat of Vermilion County, which isn't to be confused with the neighboring Vermilion County, Indiana. Additionally, there's a few other towns south of Danville along Illinois State Route 1 that, when combined with Danville, makes this place a slightly more populated urban area, if you will. Going back to 1980, Danville has been one of the fastest dying small cities in all of the Midwest, which is saying a lot, as pretty much every city the size of Danville throughout the Midwest was built on the manufacturing industry. So there's a lot of slightly better versions of Danville throughout Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana. And there's some worse places too. For example, take a look at the right armpit of Indiana, Marion. No doubt things are bad there, but objectively, Danville has suffered a sharper decline than this city has. First, it was the loss of blue-collar jobs, mainly through the coal mining industry and the closing of the General Motors plant. At least Marion still has their GM plant, and to me, that speaks to the cost of doing business in Illinois versus what it is in Indiana. Anyway, after those major blows, the town was never able to economically recover. Heck, more recently, Quaker Oats has up and left Danville. They'd been in town since 1969, but today, there are 510 less jobs in the struggling small city. Throughout this video, we'll do a deep dive into all of the reasons as to why Danville has declined the way that it has. We'll also talk about how the town was able to grow in the first place, but first, we're going to talk about what the place is like today, so let's get to it, shall we? I start the driving tour portion of the video by entering the downtown area from the south. Danville has a severe case of urban blight. The town is ugly. A lot of historic buildings are crumbling away. There's a lot of vacant land, and unfortunately crime is among the highest out of any city that you go to in Illinois. Not only are residents leaving faster than a hilljack driving a pickup truck on a Mountain Dew buzz, but businesses are too. Danville is your classic Rust Belt city in modern days, only a lot worse. A report came out earlier this year about how there were 2,500 more abandoned homes than there were people in Danville. The mayor also said that about 1,000 of them were not worth saving. And I think he's right. You tell me. Is this worth saving? Unfortunately, you can find an abandoned building on pretty much every block in Danville. In this case, it's a gas station. Immediately when you head east on Main Street, as we are right now, the first building that pops out would be Brazee Tower. But the days for the over 100-year-old building are numbered. Over the years, there's been several investors who have expressed interest in reviving the 1918 landmark, but nobody has followed through with their plans. It's a problem because for a long time the crumbling building has been seen as a safety hazard for both vehicle and pedestrian traffic. The city even permanently closed down not just the sidewalk, but also a westbound lane along Main Street due to parts of the building falling off and crashing onto the street. So, since nobody is doing anything to renovate the building, and since something clearly has to be done as soon as possible, the city has been pushing strong for demolition. Despite Brazee Tower being listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2018, and despite a strong effort from 10+ followers on a Facebook page, unfortunately it seems like the historic building will get demoed sooner rather than later. Now, if you're a local who's watching this video and you're passionately wanting this building to stay, I don't think you should be mad at the city. Rather, you should be upset at the former longtime owners of the building, Chris and Jerry Collins, who have done absolutely nothing to revive the building since they have owned it, despite announcing plans to do so back in 2018. I'm not saying it's easy to find the funds to renovate such a building which would cost millions of dollars. It would be a very tough task, but Chris and Jerry Collins bought the building with the intentions of doing so. Yet, they have done nothing with it after all of this time. In May of 2022, the court awarded a judicial deed to the city after the building only continued to deteriorate. The owners were able to regain ownership of the building in April of 23 through an appeal, as the court stated that the city's claim didn't meet the requirements to take ownership of the property. Well, the city followed that up by filing complaints over code violations along with a request for the owners to fix up the property. So much for winning the property back in an appeal, as the Collins never responded to the city's complaint of code violations. They also failed to appear in court to represent themselves, so in July of 23, the city was granted authorization to demolish the building. Since the abandoned former Vermilion County Courthouse Annex is attached to Brzee Tower, that building will also be demolished. Plans are calling for the city of Danville to fund the demolition of Brzee Tower, while Vermilion County will pay for the teardown of the former courthouse annex. Tearing down the building is a part of a larger plan to make the riverfront in downtown more attractive. One of the biggest things going on in town right now is the news about the riverfront development, which includes a boardwalk along the river that will be funded by money generated by the brand new Golden Nugget Casino. And for whatever it's worth, here's the casino. It's on the far eastern outskirts of Danville, and it's much closer to the Indiana state line than it is to downtown Danville. Well, there's not much else over here, so let's head back to downtown and see what's poppin' over there. This is Vermilion Street, or the actual main street for the town. The street is lined with shops and businesses for about a 2-block stretch. A long 2 blocks at that. Some of the stores are occupied, while some are not. Speaking of occupied storefronts, current Mayor Ricky Williams Jr. claims in an interview with WCIA out of Champaign that occupancy rates in downtown Danville are at 80%, up from 25% when he took over as mayor. Well, with all due respect to the current mayor, I can tell you without looking up any data that ain't true. Neither the 25% occupancy rate when he took over is true, nor is the claimed 80% occupancy rate of today. Allow me to explain my reasoning for that blatant assumption that I'm not going to do any research for to validate my assumption. Either when he took over or shortly after he took over as mayor is around the time of the pandemic shutdowns, so that 25% number might be somewhat true, but it is probably more so a stretch than it is truth. Now on to the next. It's hard to say that the claim of downtown Danville having an 80% occupancy rate isn't a stretch as well. I'd imagine that the Brzee Tower takes up a good chunk of available commercial space in downtown, which means that darn near every single building would have to be occupied in order for an 80% occupancy rate to be achieved. Not only are there still plenty of vacant storefronts up and down Vermilion, but there's other streets to downtown Danville as well than just Vermilion. Head up and down any of those streets and you'll be lucky to find any sign of life. We'll check out some of those streets as the video continues. These days, the biggest sign of life in downtown Danville on any street is the Fisher Theater. Here I'm in downtown Danville on Vermilion Street, just north of the downtown strip, if you will, and at least they have a pretty nice theater still. On the other side of the street from the theater, however, it's an empty building. I've got to admit, it's nice to see a preserved historic theater here given the state of downtown and what the city has been through. The theater was originally opened in 1884 as the Grand Opera House. In 1912, ownership changed hands to Mr. Lewis Fisher, who renovated it and reopened it as the Fisher Theater in 1913. Well, after a long run, the theater was forced to close in 1981. It wasn't long, though, until strong efforts were made to try and save it. Starting in 1983, Danville native celebrities including Gene Hackman, Jerry and Dick Van Dyke, Donald O'Connor, and Bobby Short raised funds for renovations by doing things like bagging groceries for donations. Hundreds of Danville residents band together and volunteered their own time and work to help save the theater as well, but those efforts unfortunately failed. It wasn't until 2018 when Danville area native Julius W. Hegler II donated several $1 million to renovate the theater, and at that point, it was able to reopen. Unfortunately, Hegler II passed away 1 year later in 2019. But he lived a long life, as he was 91 years old. Another thing I have to admit is that past the theater on the left and sitting across from the county administration building are some lonely-looking buildings. It's an empty building, followed by another empty building with an old store closing liquidation sale sign that was never taken down. Who knows how long that one's been up, but it's followed by yet another empty-looking building. Some lonely buildings, I tell ya, in a lonely-looking town. At least 24/7 Wall Street seems to think so. In a recent list, the website ranks Danville as the second loneliest metro area in the United States. What's weird about their ranking is that Washington, D.C. is the only metro area that's ranked above Danville. However, there's other Illinois cities in the top 10. Decatur is in 7th place, and Champaign-Urbana is in 8th place. Ohio is the only other state with 2 in the top 10 on that list. I like Champaign-Urbana though, so yeah, I don't get that one. I mean, it's home to the University of Illinois, the Fighting Illini, so of course you're going to have a bunch of adults who live by themselves because you have young college kids. So any college town that's on that list is probably a skewed stat. But Danville, Danville doesn't have that excuse because there is no college in Danville that is carrying hundreds of people in their young 20s. That being said, a part of the criteria for 24/7 Wall Street's ranking was the percentage of adults living alone. Danville came in 2nd place across 385 in that category. That's also how Champaign-Urbana got high on that list because there's a high percentage of adults who live by themselves. But once again, that's that young college crowd that's just kind of distorting those stats a little bit. But unfortunately, in Danville's case, I feel like that means a lot of single parents. That's a common theme among many of these small, dying cities that dot the Midwest. I've lived in a similar city in Indiana, and I know that firsthand that was a big problem there. The publisher also says that Danville also comes in 10th to last place in median household income out of all of the metro areas that were studied, and Danville comes in 3rd to last place for adults with a bachelor's degree or higher. Danville comes in 5th to last place in having the cheapest rent, and not as dramatically low, but still pretty low on the list when it comes to the percentage of one-person households. So yeah, man, that's some sad stuff. Some sad stuff indeed. That being said, you can find many Danville residents on Indeed.com these days. They won't find many jobs though, at least within a half-hour's drive. According to the Illinois Department of Employment Security, only 2 metro areas in Illinois had a higher unemployment rate in 2023. Rockford led the way, followed by Decatur, and then it was Danville, tied with Kankakee. That data was from 2023, however. Since then, Danville might have broken the tie with Kankakee, and it might have even surpassed both Decatur and Rockford. In April of 24, Quaker Oats announced that they were closing their longtime Danville operations. The last paychecks were sent out to 510 employees on June 8th, 24, or only a few weeks before I uploaded this video. Quaker Oats is headquartered out of Chicago, but they've had a facility in Danville going all the way back to 1969. If you have had any Quaker Oats granola bars in recent years, they were made right here in Danville. An article from 2011 claimed that the Danville plant made enough granola bars to fill 13 Olympic-sized swimming pools over the course of a year. But the days of Danville filling Olympic-sized swimming pools with granola bars are over. Quaker Oats was among the largest employers left in Vermilion County until it closed. The company decided that it was best if they closed their Danville location and consolidated operations in a newer facility, which is basically them saying that they're cutting costs by employing fewer people, and it's one less facility that they have to pay operating expenses for. The news came a year after some major product recalls with their granola bars, so that might have been a part of the decision making too. Anyway, not only did it leave over 500 area residents without jobs, but it also was a huge cut to the tax revenue for the city. I guess that's where the thought of opening the Golden Nugget Casino comes into play. Desperate times call for desperate measures, they say. Not long after that, Red Lobster announced their closure in Danville. Now, Danville isn't alone there, as Red Lobster has been closing locations like crazy all over the country, so I personally don't think that that's too big of a deal, but this town seems to think so. ABC 20 out of Springfield clumped in the Red Lobster closure in the same sentence with the Quaker Oats shutdown in a recent story about job losses in Danville. I guess when there's not much left in town, any store or restaurant that closes is a huge deal. Meanwhile, the current mayor of Danville has been very proactive in tearing down blighted buildings. Wouldn't surprise me if many of these structures that we're seeing on this side of downtown are no longer here soon. Next up on the list of closures might be the Village Mall on the far north side of town. We'll get back to where we were in the driving tour of downtown in just a few minutes. Well, here's something I've never done for a video before. Go inside a shopping mall. Let's see what it looks like inside, shall we? The Village Mall was first opened in 1975. Like most shopping malls in cities the size of Danville throughout the country, the mall hasn't necessarily aged like a fine wine. The mall was auctioned off by the owners, AZT Corporation, in 3 sections back in May, right around the time that I was in Danville and filming for this video. The larger of the 3 sections was the portion of the mall with the occupied stores such as Dunham's, County Market, Pet Supplies Plus, and Ross Dress for Less. The opening bid on the section was $1.75 million. The second section has a few stores like Joann Fabrics, Bath & Body Works, and Hibbett Sports, but the section is mostly an empty portion of the mall. The third section was the southwest parking lot, in which the opening bid for both sections 2 and 3 were only at $1. The section of the mall that I was talking about that had most of the occupied stores didn't sell, but sections 2 and 3, the ones with a $1 opening bid, did sell. The mayor says that while AZT Corporation is based out of Dallas, Texas, the actual owners live outside of the country, which has made communication difficult. The city of Danville placed a $4.7 million bid for the occupied section of the mall, but AZT Corporation rejected the offer by saying that the reserve was not met. And quite frankly, I'm not really sure what that means. It seems to me that the owners just didn't want to sell it to the city of Danville. The second section was sold for $470,000, while the highest bidder for the southwest parking lot was around $42,500, which is less than the price of most new cars. Anyway, hopefully something good can be done with this property in the long term because Danville needs a good investment for a change. Back to downtown as we drive past the Celebrity Wall mural. Dick and Jerry Van Dyke leading the pack. Dick is still trucking along at 98 years of age. His brother Jerry died in 2018 at the age of 86. Both of them got their acting starts here on stages in Danville. Unfortunately, I didn't drive past this on my trip here, but as far as I know, the Van Dyke childhood home still stands along Hazel Street, north of Fairchild, not far from the high school. In early August of 23, several news headlines were buzzing around during what must have been a slow news period, talking about how the home was in danger of being demolished. I'm sure there's a bunch of natives who would love nothing other than to see the home turned into some sort of museum, but that hasn't happened. And just like many of the other historic structures in Danville, something needs to happen with it soon, whether it's renovated or torn down, because blighted buildings lower the property values of the homes surrounding it that are still occupied. They also attract squatters, which no homeowner on any residential block wants to have to deal with any kinds of trouble that might bring. Gene Hackman isn't to be forgotten either. He's still living the good life at the age of 94. Bobby Short is on the wall, so is Donald O'Connor and Helen Morgan. The past is what the town is most proud of these days because there's not much positive energy going on in modern times. That's the case with a lot of these dying small cities across the Midwest, unfortunately so. Anyway, one of the few remaining blue-collar employers in town would be St. Louis-based Bungie, which you've seen glimpses of so far in the video. Once the Brzee Tower gets torn down, this massive grain elevator will be the tallest structure in Danville. It already seems to tower over everything based on how much space it takes up. Well, I guess there is one good recent story when it comes to economic growth in Danville. To the right is not only a pretty new shiny building, something that Danville doesn't see very much of, but it's Carl at the Riverfront. It's a medical office, but it's a part of the larger envisioned project called the Riverfront Development. I mentioned it some earlier, but the development will include several nature trails, a boardwalk, and a larger park for people to come and enjoy spending time in downtown Danville. Hopefully, not only will that be able to go through completely, but it will also accomplish the later goal of attracting new businesses into downtown. Now, whether that happens or not is yet to be seen. Only time will tell. Now, let's go over the economic stats for Danville, shall we? Here's a side-by-side comparison of the population history for both Danville and Vermilion County. You can see that both the county and the city started their economic downward spiral in 1980. The population for the county peaked at 97,000 in 1970, while the city's population peaked at 42,000 during the same census count. The city has lost about 14,000 people at this point, while the county has lost 26,000, or about twice as many people. Danville today is home to just over 28,000 through an ever-shrinking number. In fact, Danville was the second fastest shrinking metro area from 2010 to 2020 throughout the entire country. Only Pine Bluff, Arkansas was higher on the list. The median household income is $42,000 per year, and only 17% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher. The median value of owner-occupied housing units is $75,000, and the poverty rate is 25%. You can see that the numbers for the county are pretty similar overall. On to the crime rates now, and the violent crime rate is 1,700 for every 100,000 residents, while the property crime rate is 4,800 for every 100,000 residents, which is not good at all, especially for a small city that's isolated from other large population centers and already struggles to attract any sort of economic growth. You know, if you're a company and you're looking to expand and you're looking at all these small cities throughout the Midwest, there's just way too many other options out there in the forms of other cities that would be better places for a company to set up shop, even in the struggling Midwest, even in the high-tax state of Illinois. It would be a much better place to set up shop in Champaign or Urbana than it would be Danville. Same thing goes for people who are looking to possibly relocate to another place. You know, not that there's a whole lot of people who are looking to move to any of these small cities that dot the rural Midwest landscape, but for those who are, I'll just be honest, they would be foolish to move to Danville, unless there is a job offer that they just couldn't turn down, or maybe they have family in the area, or maybe they just like how cheap the housing is here. But if it's that third option, there's plenty of other nearby cities with housing that is just as cheap. So being affordable isn't really an advantage for Danville either, at least I don't think so, because if you head 30 minutes east along I-74, not only do you escape the high taxes imposed by the state of Illinois, but you're also in the much, much better off community of Crawfordsville, Indiana. Not saying that that town is perfect, but it's like the Bahamas compared to Danville. Crawfordsville today has about 16,000 people, but it's been growing slowly but surely over the years. And soon, both Crawfordsville and Danville will have the same amount of people living in their city. And then it won't be long before Crawfordsville's population surpasses that of Danville. Current anonymous Danville resident from 2 months ago on a niche.com forum agrees with me. This person sounds like someone who is absolutely fed up with the economic climate of the town. I'm going to guess that they'll be hopping on the bandwagon of leaving Danville based on that opinion, but that person said something else in that comment that I wanted to look more into. They said how the mayor and how members of the city council seem content giving themselves a raise, despite the current state of the town's economy. That stood out to me because I've mostly been seeing praise by local small-town media outlets whenever there's a story on current Mayor Ricky Williams Jr., and maybe he has done a good job, but I also know that these small-town media outlets can be suckers to local politicians. It's that small-town culture, where everyone rallies together and sticks up for one another. I can't figure out if that's why I can't find too much evidence that goes against the current Danville mayor, or if he actually has done a pretty good job. I think I'm leaning towards the thought that the current mayor has actually done a pretty good job. I've read numerous stories where Williams has been proactive in solving problems that the previous mayor seemingly wouldn't touch, such as the demolition of the Brzee Tower or trying to purchase the Village Mall from the current owners to make sure that the property doesn't get devalued even more than it already has. Hold that thought, because we're going to turn this ship around and we're going to start heading east on Main Street. That's the more run-down part of town, so let's see what that part of town looks like. I might be wrong, but I think that was former Danville Mayor Scott Eisenhower. Nah, probably not. He seems more like a 2017 Chevy Equinox kind of guy, or maybe a 2018 Honda Passport. I don't know, what do you guys think? Eisenhower was the mayor of Danville from 2003 to 2018. He was actually arrested just last year for domestic battery while working as the Rantoul Village Administrator, a job that he just up and left being the mayor of Danville for. That's right, Eisenhower sat in the mayor's seat for this town for 16 years before seemingly impulsively leaving to go work a different job in a nearby town in 2018. That's when Ricky Williams Jr. took over as interim mayor, and he's been the mayor ever since. Williams Jr. already looks better in the public eye than Eisenhower does based off of that. A deeper dive into the search algorithms shows me that back in June of 22, the city council approved a $15,000 per year raise in salary for the mayor of Danville, which totaled out to be about a $90,000 per year salary. You could buy the biggest house in Danville with that income. I don't know if that's the worst thing, though. I think that a lot of people just want someone to blame because things have been so bad here for so long, and when you become the face of a community by being elected as mayor, that's just a part of the job. Anyway, yeah, overall, I think that Williams Jr. seems to be doing a pretty good job. An article here mentions how the Danville city property tax has gone down during Williams' term, and further down in the article it mentions how Vermilion County raised their property tax levy by 4.99%, so maybe some people in the area saw that their property tax bill was higher than it used to be, and maybe they just assumed that the city property tax went up, but no, the city property tax actually went down, but it was the county that raised their property tax. Although that article was written by Williams Jr. himself on the City of Danville's website. I think that is probably a true statement that he's saying, but then again, slanted media, small town, everybody bands together, the local media sucks up to the local politicians, yeah. So unless there's like an arrest or a DUI or, something crazy, it's likely that there's some secrets, but it can't be that bad. What's also not the fault of Danville's mayor is the closing of the longtime Quaker Oats facility. At least I don't think it's the mayor's fault. Maybe there's something the mayor could have done to step in and keep the company in town, but I don't think so. Quaker Oats was the one that committed the fault of the health violations in their granola bars that were manufactured in Danville. That resulted in a huge loss in profits for the company in 2023. With Danville's facility being 55 years old, it was going to cost a pretty penny for Quaker Oats to make upgrades to modernize their Danville location. I don't know if outdated equipment is part of the reason as to why there were health violations in the granola bars for Quaker Oats. Anyway, it was the company's decision to leave Danville, and in their decision to leave, they mentioned how they were going to consolidate operations to a modern facility. That makes me think that they weren't really all that happy with the condition of Danville's facility. Anyway, yeah, the company left Danville in the dust. It wasn't the mayor's doing. Meanwhile, the east side looks rough, doesn't it? The only grocery stores are either attached to liquor stores, are dollar stores, or are a part of a gas station. The only real shopping in town is on the far north end of town, and the east side where we are right now, it takes a while to get there. You have to drive through the town. It probably takes about 15 minutes, and that's probably the longest drive that you could get from anywhere in Danville to another spot. So, yeah, not really a good part of town. After looking up this town, Royal Donut Shop off of the main street closer to downtown is like one of the things Danville is proud of. I couldn't help but notice this old Royal Donut Shop here on the far east side. Danville Area Community College might teach you how to make donuts. The college is out this way, and we just passed by it along the south side of East Main Street. Speaking of East Main Street, you can see the rest of it, along with everything else that I filmed, but didn't use in this video, through my second Danville video, which will be uploaded on my archive channel, and the link for it will be down below once that's uploaded. Anyway, Danville Area Community College begun in 1946, and is one of the larger employers now for the town. It really does seem to be among the best things that Danville has going for it anymore. Behind the community college is the VA clinic, which is also one of the larger employers that remain in town. We're still on the east side of town. We're just now north of the railroad tracks over by Fair Oaks Public Housing. The Section 8 apartments are ran by the Vermilion County Housing Authority and are one of 5 total public housing complexes in Danville. Fair Oaks was first built all the way back in the 1940s. These apartments have been good for many families over the years, as living here has been a stepping stone, giving many families a chance to get some finances in order before renting out a better apartment elsewhere, or in some cases, even buying a home. It's not easy living here though, as Fair Oaks has been a hotspot for violent crime for many years. The land surrounding Fair Oaks reflects that, as there's quite a bit of blighted homes and other buildings on the surrounding streets. There's also several vacant lots in the area where buildings once stood. Some of the vacant land was once a part of Fair Oaks, actually. A little bit less than half of the Fair Oaks property was torn down just a few years ago. 92 apartments were torn down in an effort to clean up the area, as most of the torn down apartments were just standing there empty. They say that the plans are to put a park here eventually, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see if that ever happens. Here's a screenshot from Google Street View in 2019, and today it's just an open field of overgrown grass. The Housing Authority's website claims that Fair Oaks still has 167 apartments after the demolition. The reason why so many of the original over 300 Fair Oaks apartments have been torn down is because they became unlivable. The reason why they became unlivable was because they were mostly unrenovated for the 70 years that they were standing, and that's also 70 years of renters. Danville is about 2 hours south of Chicago, and most of the public housing in the state of Illinois is in the Chicago area, of course. Well, the public housing in Danville went for a long period of time without being touched for any kind of redevelopment to make them nicer places to live. So that's 70 years of no renovations and 70 years of renters. Sounds gross, right? Well, it was. And Fair Oaks is some of the oldest public housing in the state of Illinois. Back in 2012, the city attempted to take care of the problem by clearing out half of their public housing stock, but city officials in exchange were given a housing discrimination complaint instead. The demand for public housing has always been high in Danville, higher than what the city could ever provide. It's easy to have housing in high demand, though, when people are only paying $17 a month in rent. That's why people come here, despite the violent crime that has occurred here for many years. A lot of the residents, current and former, have come down from Chicago and the surrounding suburbs, where the streets can be really dangerous, not like what you would see in the rural parts of the state, like where Danville is. But unfortunately, some of that street violence from Chicago has come down to Danville, and it started once Fair Oaks was built in the 1940s. Since then, the city has had extremely high crime rates. Back in 1942, the housing complex was purposely built away from most other amenities in town. Yet for a while, it was the most densely populated area in Danville. There used to be a convenience store around the corner, but the closest true grocery store has always been at least 2 miles away. Same with the closest school. Surrounding Fair Oaks is mostly vacant industrial properties and declining single-family home neighborhoods. Railroad tracks block connections between Fair Oaks and the East Main Street corridor for around a mile stretch. So not only are the people who live here already struggling economically, but they have to rely on their vehicles to do the simplest of things, such as buying groceries, and for the people who live in the public housing, owning a car definitely isn't easy. It's a little bit easier, though, when you're only paying $17 a month. That's true. Here you can see what impact crime has had on the surrounding properties. Some of the homes are still occupied, but clearly some of them are abandoned, and some have even been torn down. This is a pretty sizable empty lot right here, and it looks like a church used to be here, maybe? Street view goes back to 2007 on this street, and there was nothing here then either. Nothing other than the sign that we just saw. Just north of Fair Oaks is another apartment complex. This one isn't Section 8, but it kind of looks like it. It seems like Danville just hasn't cared at all about this one small corner of town throughout the years. Apartments.com has the monthly rent for the Grove Apartments listed between $726 and $983, so a little bit more than $17 a month. You have to wonder how long the remaining parts of Fair Oaks will last, along with these apartments. When I came through, there was a bunch of trash laying around, as you'll see up ahead. There was a large couch that was sitting next to a dumpster. There was what appeared to be a tent in the woods, right on the other side of a chain link fence. You could argue that from the outside, the remaining buildings in Fair Oaks looked nicer than these apartments. We've seen just about everything there is to see here. I showed you a glimpse of the old Quaker plant that's just north of both of these apartment complexes earlier, so let's head on over to Vermilion Street. Danville was founded in 1827 on 40 acres of land that was donated by Guy Smith and 20 acres of land that was donated by Dan Beckwith, who the city is named after. Beckwith was born in Pennsylvania. He later settled in Indiana before being drawn to modern-day Danville from the salt springs in the Vermilion River. Shortly after the city was established, lots were being advertised in Indianapolis through newspapers. Vermilion Street is going to be a nice change of scenery from everything else that we've seen in town so far. Well, Beckwith, along with the original settlers, expected to be able to find either gold, silver, or salt through mining in the area. Salt was mined in large amounts for a short period of time, and gold was found in 1891 northwest of Danville. That newspaper clipping was from the Miners' Journal on May 11th, 1891. It was coal mining, however, that really helped Danville grow into the size that it did. The first mine in Vermilion County opened in 1853. Coal mining was big throughout much of downstate Illinois, but Danville quickly became a hub for east-central Illinois as well as west-central Indiana, since most of the coal in the Danville area was found in seams that were close to the surface. Strip mining was the most common practice in this area. Some of the ways that strip mining took place first originated here in the Danville area. The first mines that popped up throughout Vermilion County started out to be pretty small mines, and they were scattered throughout the vicinity of Danville. In the 1860s, larger strip mines started to appear. That's also around the same time that the first railroad was built through Danville, which connected the town with Chicago. Although the majority of the area's coal mining activity happened well over 100 years ago, you can still find remnants of it throughout Vermilion County, which is pretty neat. A lot of the old strip mines are on private property now. They can be pretty dangerous too, as they're basically holes in the ground. Here's a map of the coal mines in Danville. You can see that most of it is situated in the southern and western portions of town. Head south of Danville and there's even more huge chunks of land that sit on top of abandoned underground coal mines. Underground mining in the area started to grow significantly in the 1870s. As many as 4,000 people were employed in coal mining activities during this era. The activity continued to surge through 1925 when Vermilion County led the nation in coal production. During peak activity, there were as many as 49 active coal mines in the county. West of Danville is Kickapoo State Park, which is full of makeshift lakes that were created from old strip mines. Illinois claims that it's the first state park in the country to be located on old strip mining land. Just looking at the land west of Danville through an aerial shot can say a lot about the past strip mining activity. The strip mines didn't last for very long though. Since most of the usable coal was close to the surface, companies gave up after it proved to be too difficult to reach coal reserves that were further underground. The first major companies started to leave Danville in the 1930s. Post-World War II, almost all of the coal mining activity in the area was abandoned. Today there are no active coal mines in Vermilion County, and there are under 30 active ones in the state of Illinois, a state that was once in third place in the country for coal production. There was more than just coal mining that made Danville thrive early on. The city became a railroad hub with tracks connecting Danville with cities like Chicago, Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Memphis. Clay production was a big sector of the local economy as well. The city was built on hard-working, blue-collar jobs in the coal mines, on the outskirts of town, and in the factories inside the town. Rail yards too. But things really started to change in Danville in the 70s and 80s when factories started to close. The coal mines had already been closing, now the factories were too. Windbreaker jackets used to be made here. Not anymore though. There's a mural reminding everybody on one of the many fading buildings in downtown. The General Motors plant in town used to employ over 1,000 until it closed for good in 1996. The Chicago Tribune says that it was the biggest and best-paying employer for miles around. The company's payroll in 1995 was $55 million. $55 million in 1996 money that no longer was funneling through the Danville economy. Plus, whatever additional tax revenue GM paid to Danville and Vermilion County, yeah, that was gone too. The Danville GM plant employed as many as 3,000 in the 1950s during its peak. Workers at the plant helped build military truck axles for World War II. Many of the workers were a part of the UAW and were able to get jobs with General Motors elsewhere in the country. The others? Yeah, they were mostly considered to be unskilled workers and had a tough time finding other jobs in Danville since the amount of factory jobs in town kept shrinking. General Motors, with the General Electric plant and the Hyster factory combined, at their peak employed 7,000 workers in Danville. Today they're all gone. Yes, manufacturing has suffered greatly across the United States, but Illinois in particular might have had the roughest go of it throughout all of the Rust Belt states. This is mostly done through state-imposed laws and taxes, where local communities like Danville have no control over how much it'll cost a business to operate out of their city or county. Companies like General Motors look for areas that are cost-effective for them, and if they can save money as a company by operating in a cheaper state or through operating in Mexico, then that's what they're going to do, as is pretty much every other manufacturer. Well, Danville might be the hardest hit community in all of Illinois from the standpoint of manufacturing jobs that have been lost. There's a lot of other cities in the Chicago area that are suburbs of Chicago, and then of course you have East St. Louis and some other suburbs of St. Louis on the Illinois side that have had a very difficult time. Rock Island and Moline are not doing so well, but those cities are located right next to other cities that have other economic opportunities. Danville is just out here on its own. And remember, Danville just lost their Quaker Oats plant, which employed 500 people, not too long ago before me uploading this video. So once you think the last major hit to the economy comes, another one comes out of nowhere. It's very unfortunate what's happened here. Now we're starting to see the retail corridor, or what's left of it. You have the dying mall that we saw earlier, and stores are continuing to close up this way. Restaurants, stores, you name it. So we'll see what the future holds for this part of town. But other historic things of note that have occurred in Danville includes that the city lies along the path of the Trail of Death. The Trail of Death refers to the Potawatomi tribe who headed southwest by foot from Plymouth, Indiana to reservation lands in eastern Kansas. 4 members of the tribe died and were buried in Danville. Abraham Lincoln has been here more times than you or I have, unless you live here, that is. Lincoln practiced law at the Vermilion County Courthouse often in the mid-1800s. Lincoln also gave a speech from the balcony of the Fithian home, which we passed by much earlier in the video, and here it is again. We'll get right back to the retail corridor in just a bit. This is Danville High School, home of the Vikings. The school first opened back in 1870. Enrollment these days hovers around 1,400. It used to be much higher than that. The school hit its athletic peak in the 80s. There hasn't been much winning since then among many of the teams. There's a long list of notable alumni. Most of them are well before my generation, though. I've mentioned Dick Van Dyke, who actually received his high school diploma from Danville in 2004. He left high school early on to join the military before finding himself a nice acting career. Jerry Van Dyke as well, Gene Hackman, yup, Donald O'Connor, yup, heard that one before, Bobby Short, yup, heard that one too. Well, here's one I haven't heard of yet. The voice of Michael in GTA 5, Ned Luke, is an alumni. Astronaut Joseph Turner, Matthew Stover is from here as well. Wow, the coal mine culture here must have really sparked some creativity out of the population in Danville back in the day. Well, people, it is now that time. What did we learn in this video? We learned that you can't always trust that you won't find a lump of coal in a beverage bought in Danville, and you can't always trust a pawn shop's claim that they have an antique anvil, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. The first category is education. Danville high school students these days score well below the state average in all three categories of math, reading, and science. The college readiness score by US News is only a 13 out of 100. That explains the lack of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher in town because the ones who do go to college, leave, and never come back. Education gets a 7 out of 20. Next up is crime, which is terrible here. One of the worst cities in Illinois in that regard, it gets a 3 out of 20. Downtown is next, and while occupancy rates of storefronts along Vermilion Street seem to have improved in recent years, there's still a lot of work to be done for Danville to make full use of their downtown area. It gets a 6 out of 20. Economy is next, and oh boy is it bad. No good jobs anywhere to be found unless you're in the medical field, but if you're in the medical field, you can work anywhere that you want in this country. So why would you pick Danville? Unless you have family here. But yeah, this is the golden age for medical field jobs. Not so much coal mining or automotive factory jobs. Yeah, those days are in the past. Not to mention how Danville is isolated from other population centers. Champaign-Urbana is the closest one, and that town's economy revolves around college hippies, so economy gets a 2 out of 20. Recreational opportunities is next, and Kickapoo State Park nearby is a great asset. And if you like canoeing or kayaking, you have the Vermilion River. If you like other forms of boating, you have Lake Vermilion. So that's all good and dandy. Otherwise, you're surrounded by flat farmland for miles and miles, with some rolling hills and forested land surrounding the ravines of the area's creeks and rivers. Recreation gets a 7 out of 20. History is next, and Danville has a very fascinating history. Vermilion County once led the nation in coal production. Windbreakers were made here at one point. You have classic names like Dick Van Dyke and Gene Hackman who are from here. History gets a 16 out of 20. Amenities is next, and those are declining more and more as time goes on. It seems like every other month, a local favorite restaurant chain or another chain retailer closes up shop. It's sad, but amenities are better found 30 minutes west along I-74. That gets a 5 out of 20. Cost of living is the last category, and property taxes are high in Danville. Whether they're high from being imposed by the county or the city, I don't know. Danville's mayor says that it's from the county, but whoever it's from, they're high. Property taxes are, that is. And you can save thousands of dollars a year by just buying a place 6 miles to the east if you really need to live in the area. Otherwise, you can rent for $17 a month if you're lucky enough to get past the logjam of a waitlist for Fair Oaks. Well, cost of living gets an 18 out of 20. All in all, the Chris livability score for Danville, Illinois is 64 out of 160, putting it in a tie with another Illinois city that borders Indiana, that being Calumet City. Well, another place that Danville reminds me of is this city in Indiana right here. Otherwise, if you're a fan of seeing urban blight, make sure to not only check out that video, but also check out my second Danville video, as there is a lot of urban blight that I didn't show you in this video. So the link for my second Danville video will be down below once it's uploaded. Peace.